there are really three things I'd like for you to take home from my presentation, and I'll talk about lots of things today, but if you only take three things home, these are the things that I want you to take home with you. First, that teens can be involved in the family-school relationship in ways that children cannot. Because of their cognitive development, their social development, their identity development, they can be engaged in this, and they should be engaged in their education in ways that an elementary school child just isn't capable of doing yet because of their cognitive development. And the second thing I'd like for you to take home is that the most effective parental involvement strategies for adolescents actually take place within the parent-adolescent relationship, and much less so in the relationship between the parents and schools. And I'll talk to you a little bit about why it is the kinds of things that work in elementary school don't work in middle school. And so the role for schools is really equipping parents and communicating with parents. If schools can do, particularly middle schools and high schools, can do anything well, is building that bridge of communication to equip parents so that they can do the work that they need to do within the relationship they have with their child. And the third thing I'd like for you to take home is, as you're evaluating and thinking about the most effective strategies for family-school relationships, is to not just use academic achievement as your measure of effectiveness. That once you move into middle school and high school, the direct relationship between parenting more generally and family school relationships in particular and academic achievement, it's not direct anymore. You see a direct relationship in elementary school. In middle school and high school, it's no longer a direct relationship between family school relationships and achievement. And what you see is that what happens with family school relationships and parental involvement in education, it actually increases engagement in school. It increases a sense of self-efficacy and self-esteem, and those things in turn impact achievement. So when you're considering the kinds of strategies that you want to help your families engage in, remember it's not just grades and test scores that you should be looking at, and that's most important in adolescence. And so those are the three take-home messages, and so everything else now is fluff. So I want to start with, what is family school relationships? And I call it parental involvement in education as a more broader term than family school relationship, because it really is what are parents doing holistically in school, out of school, in their relationships to support their children's achievement. So for example, one of my colleagues defines it as school-specific parenting, including discussions between parents and children about schoolwork and things happening at school. But again, it's discussions between the family and their own children. It's a commitment of resources to support academic development. So often we focus on homework help or parent-teacher conferences, but parents often, their real role and most salient role is providing resources, whether it's the kinds of books and extracurricular activities, tutoring services, setting examples. It's the financial resources or commitment of other kinds of family resources to support academic development. And then lastly, my own definition is I define this as parents work both with the school and with their children or their teens to benefit their educational outcomes and future success. And I broaden the outcomes to not just talk about what they're doing in school, grades, achievement, even school engagement, but parents are in this game of supporting their kids because they want them to grow up and be great things. When you ask parents, when you talk to parents, you say, what do you want your child to do when they grow up? They have amazing dreams for their children. Amazing dreams. They sometimes, by middle school, lose sight of those dreams. But they have these amazing dreams, and almost all of these dreams require education. So education and schooling and this relationship with the school is a process to help their children become the kinds of young adults that they hope they will become. So what does this mean for adolescents? And why might it need to be different? Why does family school relationships and parental involvement need to be different? And I'm going to go through the first two quickly, and the third one I'll spend a little bit of time with. And one is that there are changes in the parent-adolescent relationship and parenting goals during adolescence. One of the things that we do to parents is just when they figured out the elementary school and they figured out their relationships with their kids, they figured out the disciplinary strategies that work, they become adolescents and everything changes. I mean, everything changes. So they're renegotiating what they're in control of, they're renegotiating what their teens want control of, and then we change the entire school context. So they no longer know the teachers. We don't give them a good way to get to know the teachers. We change everything. And conflict increases. They're trying to figure out the right level of responsibility to give their children who are demanding independence and responsibility, and the game changes. So even the relationship between families and their own children changes during adolescence, and that's one reason why involvement needs to be different. And secondly, there's changes in the school structure between elementary school and middle school. So it's a larger school, it's more diverse, ethnically, socioeconomically, in a larger peer group. And so it's just a larger context in which children need to find their place. And as Jackie Eccles in her stage environment fit theory talks about, there's more didactic instruction rather than self-directed instruction. They have short periods in which teachers must cover material, so it becomes much more didactic rather than self-directed. And given where children are, the teenagers are in their cognitive development and their identity development, they should be doing more self-directed and self-initiated learning, but we just don't have time for that in the way the schools are structured in middle school and high school. There's departmental instruction. They see more teachers over the course of the day, so it makes it really hard for teens to develop a relationship with an adult outside of their family. At the very time they really need adults outside of their families to affirm who they are, we make it more complex and more difficult for them to find these adults that will get to know them and take an interest in them in a deep way. And thirdly, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time here, is their own development, their cognitive and brain development and identity development. And as I'm trained as a developmental psychologist, but I teach in a school of education, and I think this is a part where we miss as educators, is really is understanding what's going on inside that teen's head. And so we're going to talk about that for just a minute around their cognitive and brain development, because it really changes how they make decisions, when they can make good decisions, and that impacts how we can engage them in their own education. So the brain develops in adolescence. There are two periods in the child's life in which the brain has rapid development, and one is in the 0 to 3-year-old stage, and the second one is during adolescence. And the first thing that happens in adolescence, one of two processes of the brain development, is myelinization. And what that is, and this is a brain cell, and if you see the yellow myelin sheath, it's like a blanket of fat that grows over the neuron of the brain during adolescence that makes the brain cell function faster. So this is why they become so good at arguing with you when they're teenagers, because they're thinking faster than they were when they were elementary school students. And so they're connecting things in ways that parents are surprised that they're connecting, and so parents have to step up their game in terms of negotiating with their children. And so you have this myelinization, which is making them a faster thinker and more efficient thinker. So there's increased speed of the electrical signal between the neurons, and there are stronger and faster associations based on experience. So they can draw connections in faster ways than they could when they were in elementary school. And so this is happening over the course of early adolescence into mid-adolescence. So right in that middle school years, their brain is developing, and it's growing, and it's becoming sharper and faster. It's not there yet. I think about it as they now have this fast sports car, but they haven't quite finished driver's training, and they don't know quite what to do with it yet. And so neurons that fire together wire together. So the kinds of experiences they have shape how they think. The brain develops based on experience. And so the things that they're exposed to shape how their brain develops. The second thing that happens during brain development is that there's pruning and synaptic diversity. And so there are huge growths of brain development over the course of early childhood. And so if you look at this figure, I won't take that with me. So you can see from the newborn stage up to 3, you see a huge growth. Thank you. That would be even better. Another one. There we go. Okay. Wonderful. So if you see here between the newborn stage up to about 5, you have this increase in the number of neurons and neuron diversity in the brain. And then it peaks out about age 5, and then over the course of early adolescence, you start to lose synapses. I have a 15-year-old, so I tell her, look, if you don't use those brain cells, you're going to lose them. And so what happens over the course of time is nerve cells and brain cells that you use will develop the myelin sheath and they'll become efficient. Brain cells that they don't use, they disappear, and they disappear forever. So what we want our youth to be doing is exercising their brain, being exposed to lots of different things. And it's not a bad process. It's a great process because the brain actually becomes specialized. And so the different parts of the brain become really efficient at doing what they're doing, and they become specialized. And it's mostly in the prefrontal cortex. And so this is happening inside their heads while they're in early adolescence, in middle school, and in early high school. And so this has an impact on thinking and decision making. And so you have the change in the prefrontal cortex, and so it changes how they think about delay of gratification. So can they put off their current reward to get something better in the long run? It increases the impact of emotions on decision making. None of us make good decisions when our emotions are high. This is especially true in adolescence. And so this results in uneven cognitive development. I'm going to show you 3 figures about demonstrating that. And so when you look at psychosocial maturity, which is becoming less impulsive and sensation seeking, that actually increases about age 14 and 15 into the early 20s. So that's the ability to become less impulsive, control their emotions and things like that. But their logical reasoning and being able to resist interference actually increases much earlier. And so that's why you can see teenagers sometimes making really, really good decisions. You're like, oh my gosh, they were so mature. And then other times you're like, oh my gosh, what were you thinking? And that it's the same kid. And so over time, you can see here that their psychosocial maturity increases, but at a faster rate than their cognitive maturity increases at a faster rate. And in the middle there, when there's heightened arousal in the peer context, or they're upset about something, stress happening at home, or things like that, it undermines their ability to make good decisions. But we know the kinds of contexts in which they can make good decisions. So when do they make the best decisions? It's when the decision is not emotionally charged. You can get them engaged in their own decision-making, their own curricular decisions and things like that, and they can make sound, mature decisions as long as they're not excited and there are no competing demands. When they've had practice making good decisions, so when they've made good decisions that were scaffolded and they were able to make some mistakes, learn from their mistakes, they learn to make better decisions. When those they admire make similar decisions or help scaffold their decisions, that's where teachers, guidance counselors, coaches, and their friends come into play. And third, when an immediate reward is not offset by a consequence well in the future. And what we often see when I work with parents is, their child has done something today, and they talk about how that's going to affect their future when they're 27. And if the reward is too much in the immediate context, they can't even see what 27 even being relevant. And so how the immediate reward is not offset by consequences into the future. So those are the contexts in which they make good decisions. And they can make good decisions, which is why we need to bring them into the equation. It's not parents and teachers. In adolescence, it's parents, children, and the teachers. And secondly, what's going on in addition to brain development is identity development, which can happen because they're thinking in more complex ways. It's the hallmark of adolescence. It often begins a simplistic and highly romanticized image of themselves that they try on. Have you ever spent time with middle schoolers when they think no one's watching? I mean, they try on these identities. They have exaggerated identities. And it's part of who they are, but often we trap them into those identities before they have fully matured. So they're trying them on, they're investigating them, they're trying to understand them. Their academic pursuits may become in or out of fashion with their current identity. Their friends' value for achievement matters increasingly well, so involving their friendship network in addition to the family network. And they're going to immerse themselves in information about their identity. And much to our chagrin, these kinds of issues are going to trump academic issues unless we can link their academic issues to what they're doing around their identity. Otherwise, it's irrelevant. And what often happens with ethnic minorities, particularly ones that are discriminated in the school context, the natural process of their identity development comes into conflict with what they should be doing in school. And so we need to figure out ways to feed their identity development in ways that link them to school so what they're doing in school seems still relevant. So what does all of this mean for family-school relationships? It means, based on prior research, is that the old strategies don't work anymore. And Zippy mentioned a meta-analysis I published a few years ago. We looked at the basic elementary school models of how families become involved, volunteering at school, helping with homework, taking them to educational activities outside of school and things like that. And we found that those home-based and school-based involvement were less effective. And as already been noted, teens don't want their parents at school. You know, newsflash. It's okay for their friend's parent to show up on the field trip, but just not their parent, which means no parents can show up. And, you know, but they don't want teens don't want their parents involved in that way. But they do want their parents involved. And we've talked with teens and parents and teachers about that involvement. And you get teens in a room by themselves, feed them pizza, they will tell you what they want from their parents. And they don't want their parents to back away. They don't want their parents checking their book bag. They don't want help with homework, although they do want reminders. And they don't want their parents showing up at school. But they do want their parents involved in ways that show that they care about who they are, care about their future, care about the things that they're interested in. It's all relational. And so what we found is what we called academic socialization is the most effective, linking to what parents, what they're learning in school to the things that they're doing in their future, thinking about them holistically, planning with them. Those kinds of academic socialization strategies were most effective. And what we did from this point after the meta-analysis is we've done a series of studies to really tease apart what is this thing we're calling academic socialization. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that today. And so for ethnic minorities, what we know from prior research on African Americans is that there's long legacy of discrimination. Current discrimination undermines trust. I'm an African American. I work with African American families. I cannot tell African American families in the US that they can trust the schools holistically. I can't. The data around teacher bias is clear. It's clear. And so I can't tell them in good faith, holistically trust the school. And teens see it, and it impacts their identity development and their connections to school. And so we have to build relationships and build trust in ways that take longer than they would ordinarily because of the legacies of discrimination for ethnic minorities. For Latinos who I've also worked with, people talk about, well, we need to translate because there are language barriers. It's not just translation. It's the fact that communication means relationship. It's not just about the conveyance of information. It's about conveying care. So it's not just translation. And then some types of involvement that Latino families or immigrant families are engaged in just aren't recognized by American schools. So the fact that some Latino families will take their kids to work with them to show them how hard work is if you don't have an education, it's not part of our framework. It's off our radar, even though it's a clear way in which families demonstrate how much they see education as being important. And for the Latino families and immigrants in the US, they hold teachers in such high esteem and high regard that they wouldn't dare question them. And it's odd because teachers crave that kind of trust, but teachers often interpret that trust as disinterest rather than this is what, I'm trusting you as a professional to do the right thing. And often teachers in their own biases will see that as a lack of interest. So what I will talk about here, given the time, 3 sets of studies where we've really broken out what we see as a new framework for family-school relationships in adolescence, given where adolescents are, given what we know from the literature. We started as I'm a mixed method researcher, so we started with focus groups, 20 focus groups with teens, parents, teachers. We had about 65 parents and teens and 21 teachers that teach major subjects in ethnically diverse schools in the US. And then I'm going to present 2 quantitative studies, 2 data sets with the different sets of analyses, linking the framework to achievement and school engagement across ethnicity, and then a 3rd set looking at trajectories of parental involvement from 7th to 11th grade. So often we look at parental involvement at time 1, predicting something else down the road, and what I wanted to look at is how parental involvement changes and what its trajectory is over the course of adolescence as it relates to trajectories of outcomes. I can answer lots of questions about the methods of all of these studies, but in the interest of time, I will just cut to the chase and tell you what we found. So when looking at the focus groups, listening to their voices, we recorded them, we transcribed them, 40 coders representing multiple ethnicities, gleaned these transcripts and generated 980 different strategies. We asked parents what they do, they told us what they did. We gleaned 980 strategies, and then through a process of clustering similar strategies, and we got it down to about an average of 28 clusters per reporter. So 28 clusters for parents, 28 for teachers and teens, and then we went through a process of identifying what types of strategies cut across ethnicity, cut across reporters, and then ones that didn't cut across that we still thought were important. And from that, we developed a framework that included 3 types of communication: problem-focused communication, so parents are going in and communicating about a problem; what we called proactive or preventative communication, where there's no problem, but parents are going in trying to get extra help. How do I help my child do better who's already doing well? It turns out those aren't different in the end, that parents go in when there are problems, and if they're preventing anything, they're preventing the worst thing based on the thing that they're seeing. And the third type of communication is quality communication. Secondly, promoting and scaffolding independence. I let my child make mistakes so he or she'll learn from them. In a school context, scaffolding the kinds of independence, giving them a chance to try things out, to strategize about how to do a project before jumping in and doing the project. In the US, parents want their kids to do so well, they often overhelp with the projects. And you can tell which projects are done by parents and which projects are not. And I can tell you, I'm currently working hard at a B in Algebra 2 in the 10th grade. I'm doing pretty well. Modeling learning behaviors at home. This is different than what you would see. We're way past reading together. This is how parents just show that education matters, excellence matters. Through my own activities, I show my child that excellence matters. I show my child that learning into adulthood is important. Providing structures at home. I give my child a specific place and time to complete their homework. As a parent of a teenager, I am off the hook based on my own research. I do not help with homework because it doesn't work. But I do make sure there's a time set aside for homework. I ask if it's done. I provide the supplies that they need to do the homework. I don't help. It just doesn't, for a whole wide variety of reasons, it just doesn't work. I learned Algebra 2 30 years ago. I'm not even sure I remember it. And if I do remember it, I'm not going to teach it in the same way that she's learning in school. So I'm just going to confuse the matter. And lastly, linking schoolwork to future goals. So I help my child identify the necessary steps to reach their future goals. How are the classes they're taking now mapping onto the goals that they want to achieve? So that's the framework based on the qualitative study. And then we conducted 2 quantitative studies to link it to achievement and to school engagement. So are the types of parental involvement related to achievement outcomes, and are they similar across ethnicity and parent education level? The first data set was 228 parents of 7th grade students. That included African Americans, Latinos, and whites. You can see the demographics there. We did a hierarchical regression analysis controlling for district, parental education level, and then we looked at ethnicity as a moderator. We looked at both math outcomes and language arts outcomes, and I'll talk about those findings separately. But first, just so that you can see at the mean level, you see that, here's my pointer here. The African Americans and Latinos, and it's interesting because culturally they're very different, but as outgroups, as ethnic minorities, they look fairly similar. So they do a lot more linking to the future. They provide a lot more home structure. African Americans provide significantly less scaffolding of independence, and historically African American parents, they are much more no-nonsense and they just don't support a whole lot of autonomy development. They do moderately more communication around problems, but they feel that interestingly enough, the African Americans feel that they have higher levels of quality in their conversations with teachers than did the other groups, just as mean level differences. In relation to achievement, we found that scaffolding and independence, which we expected to be positively related for whites, and it was not. It was negatively related to achievement, so associated with lower levels of achievement for whites, unrelated for blacks. And I'm going to explain that in a minute because it's counterintuitive, and what you'll see in a minute is that it's really positively associated with school engagement. And so supporting autonomy and independence matters for how they feel about school and how they're engaged in school. It doesn't quite make it to test scores. Linking to the future, it's positively related to math scores for blacks and Latinos, unrelated for whites. Problem-focused communication was unrelated to achievement for the blacks and whites, negatively related to achievement for Latinos. Modeling learning at home mattered for whites, but not for blacks or Latinos. And so you're seeing a different pattern, slightly different pattern across the ethnic minority groups compared to the majority group. For language arts, it looks very similar. Scaffolding independence was unrelated for whites, negatively related for Latinos, unrelated also for blacks. Linking to the future was positive for blacks, not for whites. Problem-focused communication was more strongly negative for Latinos, also negatively related for whites. So this engaging around problems, it's either being precipitated by problems that they're communicating about, or it's resulting in further problems. Again, modeling learning at home was positive for whites, unrelated for blacks. And quality communication did not matter. Even though it's higher for blacks, it did not result in higher test scores. And so when you're looking across these, you're seeing some commonalities across scaffolding independence, some commonalities across learning, modeling learning at home, where modeling learning at home works for the whites, but it doesn't work for the minorities. Linking to the future works for the minorities, but not so much for the blacks or for the whites. So taken together, one, ethnic minorities believe more strongly that it's essential to remain involved. I didn't show the slide there, but they believe it's their role to be involved more so than the whites. The ethnic minority parents were more strict. They provided more structure and less autonomy. And linking to the future is more significant for ethnic minorities. And for the whites, modeling learning at home worked really well, but scaffolding independence did not. And part of it, I think, has to do with the kind of common culture between home and school for the whites, that in the modeling learning at home works for them in a way it doesn't work for the ethnic minorities. So in looking at school engagement and self-esteem, we looked at 3 types of school engagement. Behavioral engagement is exactly what it sounds like. They act engaged, they show up, they do their homework, they attend, these sorts of things. Cognitive engagement is their planfulness around their schoolwork, and emotional engagement is the extent to which they feel connected to school. And then we also looked at self-esteem. This is a large public access data set. It has almost 1,500 families, blacks and whites, no Latinos. The first set of analyses we did just in middle school, 7th and 8th grade. In the second set of analyses, we followed from 7th grade to 11th grade so we could look at trajectories of involvement. For the middle school analyses, we did hierarchical regression, controlling for prior achievement, ethnicity, and SES. And then for the trajectory analyses, we looked at hierarchical linear modeling and compared growth curves for both parental involvement strategies and achievement and mental health outcomes. Like we saw in the other data set, African Americans do significantly more linking to the future and more problem-focused or proactive communication. We don't have problem-focused communication in this data set, but everything else was the same. And this data set is unique because the blacks and the whites are similar in socioeconomic status, which wasn't true in the other data set. When you look at mean levels of engagement, African Americans were significantly higher on cognitive engagement, but no difference in emotional and behavioral engagement, which is interesting. There was no difference in blacks and whites in their sense of commitment to school or feeling like they belonged to school. Relations to engagement and self-esteem. Here, we see scaffolding independence really matters. We didn't see it in relation to test scores, but for both blacks and whites, it's related to all 3 types of engagement and self-esteem. And when you think about it, when you get to adolescence, you really care about these kinds of inner resources almost, well, maybe not more so, at least equally to grades and test scores, because these are the kinds of skills that they're going to take with them into life. And so that's why I wanted to encourage you to broaden the kinds of outcomes that you look at. Because scaffolding independence, while it makes sense, it didn't relate well to grades and test scores, but it does relate well to these inner resources. Linking education to the future was positive for behavioral and emotional engagement, and this was more true for whites. Remember, linking to the future was not related to grades or test scores, but it is related to engagement and self-esteem. Quality communication is good for kids to feeling like they fit to the school. And proactive communication, it just doesn't work well. When parents get engaged in communicating with the school, even proactively, it's associated with lower levels of emotional and behavioral engagement. So conclusions from these sets of studies is across the studies, the most consistent types of involvement for the broad range of outcomes are linking education to the future, scaffolding independence, and communication. And they're more strongly and positively related to engagement and self-esteem, not just for the grades and test scores, but more so for the kinds of inner resources that matter. And linking to the future is more positive for the ethnic minorities. So the last question for this morning from me is, so what are parents doing over time? If you're looking at parental involvement at one time point relating to outcomes, what does it look like across time? And so we looked at, followed these parents through their children being in the 11th grade to see if there were increases or decreases in these types of involvement. And this is a dense figure, so I'm going to point out what you should see. You'll see first at the top the different types of parental involvement strategies, and this is the results from the hierarchical linear model. And let me just show you what you should see. This is the linear slope. So you're seeing it's negative, and that means that there are declines over time in communication, both quality communication and preventative communication. But there are increases over time in the others. So parents are doing more of this over time. More home structure, more scaffolding independence, and more linking to the future over time. And so are these increases related to grades, test scores, and achievement? And so when we looked at, well, first in this data set, and this isn't surprising with any data set, over time there are declines in engagement, there are declines in mental health, and declines in grades. So we weren't able to show a positive relationship with an actual outcome, but what we were able to find is that increases in these types of parental involvement strategies reduced the decline in grades between 7th grade and 11th grade. And so for parents, their increase in involvement does matter. Yes, it does matter. The general declines in grades and increases in conduct problems and depression over adolescence, increases in involvement, all of the types, including communication, reduce the declines in these trajectories. And that's controlling for prior grades, controlling for gender, ethnicity, SES, socioeconomic status, and initial levels of involvement. So we're really looking at change in involvement, countering for where they start out, and it actually reduces declines in grades and test scores and mental health over time. So these are the kinds of strategies that we want to think about supporting in our policies around family school engagement. So my final conclusions is because of teens' increased cognitive abilities, they can be involved in ways that you could not when they were in elementary school. So as you think about family school engagement, it's not parents and teachers, it's parents, teens, and teachers, and more specifically, supporting the relationship between the parents and the child. The most effective types of strategies for involvement are between the parent and teen. So that scaffolding autonomy and linking to the future is really what's happening in that relationship between parents and teens. And the school's role is really to equip the families to do this well. And we find that particularly ethnic minority families, they just don't have the knowledge about how the school works. The trajectory from middle school to college, that link to college is just not clear. It's not clear to parents who didn't go to college that the type of math or test score, math or science they're taking in 7th grade could open or close doors for college. It's just not apparent. No one tells them. And to also, the third thing is to include engagement and self-beliefs as you determine effectiveness. And I am going to leave you with my favorite comic, that parental involvement is really empowering parents for youth. And this is the St. Anthony School for Gifted Parents. It's really about equipping the parents. Thank you very much.